Welcome. Tonight, we're going to meet some very special people. People who I personally hope run out of business and we never need them again. But thank God they're here. Things happen in our little town at the center of the universe that a lot of us don't know are occurring. And more importantly, even when we find out, don't know how to help. We're going to talk to some special people who really do help citizens here in Milford who need help. Now, I guess since we're stationary and we're 6 to 8 feet apart, we can take off the masks for now.
Okay, great.
As soon as we get up and try and leave, we have to put them back on because you can't get through the doors and still maintain social distance.
Right.
But let's start with an introduction.
Great. Well, thanks for having us, Al. Happy to be here. So my name's Marcia Szymanski, and I'm the Executive Director of New Hope. And we are a not-for-profit organization that works with survivors of sexual and domestic violence.
And I'm Emily Purdy. I am the new Community Engagement Specialist out of the Milford office, but I've been with New Hope for 3 years now in various capacities, such as our court advocate program. I was a counselor over the summer, and last year, as part of my social work degree, I was an intern at one of our residential shelters.
I have to ask 2 questions.
Sure.
What is New Hope and why do we need it?
So, as I mentioned, we work with survivors of domestic and sexual assault here in the town of Milford. And yes, it is hard for people to think that there are people who abuse other people in the town, but I can assure you, last year we worked with about 125 individuals, and we provided about 5,000 hours of...
But Marcia, seriously, 125 Milfordians?
Yes. And that's probably just the tip of the iceberg. So in the town of Milford, we have a counseling office, which is where Emily's going to be working out of. We have a court advocate in the courts helping people with restraining orders or protection orders if they need them. So and I'll let Emily tell you about that a little bit because she's done that work. We also have an educator, which is what Emily is doing now. She's going to really try to get out in the community, let people know about our services, and provide education to a myriad of groups. And then we also have other services that people can access that are not necessarily here in Milford. We have a 24/7 hotline, which is 1-800-323-4673. And that's 24/7, always a live answered, no recording, no answering service for anyone who is struggling with domestic violence, or if someone is concerned about a friend or a family member, they can also call for support. Since COVID, our hotline calls have gone up 45%. So, and we get calls we serve from the city of Taunton. We serve 41 communities from the city of Taunton up 495 to Milford, and then south of the Pike all the way out to Sturbridge. So we have a large catchment area.
Now, the COVID comment, is that because more people are home and together? Or?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, so as we know, abuse thrives in isolation, and because of COVID, we've seen a lot of people feel isolated and are trapped home because it's not safe to go out into the community and seek the help they need, so they just feel like they have no place to go.
But why would... I have a hard time talking about this.
It is very difficult.
Because
You're not
the
alone.
thought that it's happening in our little center of the universe here is just disturbing. You read about it, it's bad. But to know it's happening here in our little town, our neighbors are, when we were talking before the show, you mentioned a statistic.
Right. 1 in 3 women will experience some form of violence or abuse over the course of her lifetime. And for men, it's 1 in 7. So what I usually say, what I said to you earlier, is that there's probably not a person out there in your listening audience that doesn't either struggle with it themselves, know a family member, a friend, someone in their faith community, a coworker, a neighbor. You would be hard-pressed to find someone that doesn't know someone who hasn't been touched by this epidemic, which it really is. I'd like Emily to tell you a little bit about her work in the courts, because I think that's oftentimes
Wait a
where
minute,
the
but Emily,
first
take a
people.
step back.
Okay.
Again, what is New Hope?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what do you offer? I mean, I'm being facetious when I say, why do we need you?
Mm-hmm.
So what we offer is a place of, for lack of better words, hope for people who feel that they're alone and have nowhere to turn. We're a group of survivor-led advocates of all capacities, whether it's our counseling advocates, the court advocates, the community advocates, because we all strive to end domestic violence, if that is even possible.
So let me tell you this. So one of the things we try to do in our work is, as Emily said, we can provide counseling. And let me say, all of our services are free of charge. And we don't accept insurance, so nothing goes in someone's medical record to be explored by someone else. So, but they can get counseling. They can see a court advocate for protection orders. They can see just a general advocate if they need help leaving their abuser and they don't have a place to go. We have two residential shelters, confidential locations where people can, if they need to flee. We have the hotline. We have an education department that works with schools. We've done some things in the Milford schools in the past, and they will work with community groups. I know Emily's looking to work with hairstylists.
Yes. So as part of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which started today, me and my coworker at our Southbridge office are putting together a virtual training for hair care professionals, because we know that some people confide in everything in their hairdresser, and hairdressers don't necessarily know how to respond if a client discloses abuse.
Well, I'm jealous. That means they have hair.
Yeah.
When you're like me, I would confide in anybody who could help me with hair.
Yes.
There you go.
So our goal is to teach hair care professionals, either if it's hairstylists or barbers, because we know that not just women are victims, but men can be victims as well. So we want them to recognize if a client discloses abuse, or even just the physical symptoms of them. Then how to respond if somebody tells you that information, and then where to refer them, whether it's New Hope or an surrounding agency that might be able to help them better.
Now, I apologize because this may seem totally sexist, and I don't mean it to be, but you say there's men and women? Because what you're reading about is usually predominantly women being preyed upon.
And that is true. I do think it is predominantly women, but as I mentioned earlier, I'd say about 10 to 12% of our clients are men or boys. We've had men in shelter. At one time, years ago when this movement started out, having a man in shelter was considered taboo. But if you take state funds, which we do, we can't discriminate. So anyone who is a victim of sexual or domestic violence is eligible to come to our shelter. One of the issues is there's just not enough shelter beds in the state. So the hardest part is when someone says they're ready to leave and they want to go into shelter and there's no shelter beds across the state. We're part of a statewide network where we update every day along with all the other shelter providers across the state whether we have openings. And then we can also, when we get a call to our hotline, we can also see where there's an opening. Usually we try to move someone out of their danger area. So if someone was in Milford, we would try to move them. Maybe there's a bed on the Cape or Western Mass or northern, north of the city up in, northern Essex County or something. So, but we probably get, 2 to 3 calls a day, people looking for shelter and there's no space. So it's a difficult situation. And one of the things, what I was going to say is that in the work that we do, there's this thing called the Full Frame Initiative, and it's really about trying to help people. It's centered on wellness, health and wellness, and what people need. And it's kind of like the old, depending on what your background is, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What people need: they need safety, they need security, they need mastery over their lives, they need social connectedness, and they need access to resources. So those are the things we try to provide to people. We do a safety plan with every person who calls our hotline. We work with clients when they go to the courts. I mean, you can talk about some of the safety planning.
So some of the safety plan that I focus on is the stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think about. So you probably, without realizing it, on Facebook have your location services on. and you often check in where you are. So if you're out with friends and say, oh, I'm at this restaurant, and you check in. But what people don't realize is that everybody who has checked in at that location can see that you checked in there as well. So if it's a frequent place, your abuser could track you that way because he knows, oh, you might be here. So I always suggest to people turn off their location settings, restrict posting where you are, or what else do I suggest? Getting rid of social media. I know that might be difficult, but that's one of the common ways. Making sure your passwords are changed if your abuser knew what your passwords were at that time. Coming up with the code word with family or friends so that if your abuser does come into the house and you have a restraining order, you can call your neighbor and say, come over, we're having pizza. And that doesn't mean come over, we're having pizza. That means he's here, call the police.
Save me.
Yes, without actually saying save me.
Without saying save me and getting whacked by
Yes.
some lunatic.
And that always is the biggest thing that I've helped people with, is because they don't realize that their neighbors and friends can play a big part in their safety. They think they're in this alone. I have to solve this problem on my own. Nobody cares about me. Nobody's going to believe me.
You know, the changes in our society and the way people view, I mean, we grew up thinking drug addiction was sleazy drug addicts in the back of Boston. And all of a sudden you found out the opioid crisis affected the neighbor's son, the neighbor's daughter. And they weren't doing drugs to do drugs. They were hurting from playing high school sports. And I mean, you're breaking my view here. All of a sudden, my little town now has 100 people.
Over 100.
Over 100 people.
And let me say that that number is low because when COVID hit the middle of March, so those numbers are from our fiscal year, which is July 1 of 2019 to June 30th of 2020. When middle of March hit and COVID and the state shut down, initially our client load went down to nothing because people couldn't get out. They were trapped. Their abusers were constantly monitoring them. They didn't even have an ability to make a phone call.
The courts were closed.
The courts closed, yes, everything was shut down. So our numbers in April, May, and June, they just started to come back up again in July as the state has opened up. So those numbers those are really only 9 months worth of numbers.
But it's really not the numbers that went down. It was just the people who could access.
Right, right. We still know it was happening, even more so.
I mean, the animals that are committing this atrocity didn't say, well, it's COVID, I shouldn't abuse anybody anymore.
No. And if anything, if a family not only being isolated, as Emily talked about, but if they've lost their job, they're worried about paying their bills, people were drinking more during the COVID, liquor sales were, I mean, I admit I was going to the liquor store myself, getting a nice bottle of wine to get through the, So I think those things, they don't cause domestic violence, but they can cause it to escalate to even greater degree.
Well, I mean, I think that the fact that you were confined, at least, I mean, this sounds cold, but I don't mean it to be, but at least if the animal leaves the house 8 hours a day, that's a period of quiet sanity.
Right.
If the abuser's stuck in the house with you all day.
Right. Some of them either lost their jobs or they had jobs, where they could work remotely. So they were home working. So, And the other thing to think about is domestic violence. It's a individual, family, community. It's a business problem, too. They estimate about $8 billion a year are lost to businesses have lost due to domestic violence because the abuser is spending a lot of time calling and trying to check in on their victim. The survivor is having a lot more medical issues, so medical costs are going up. They oftentimes miss a lot of time at work, or they're late, or they're stressed, so they're not focusing on their job. So it's a huge, for a fiscal conservative like yourself, I think it's important to realize that it's also it impacts the entire community, every segment.
And I can add on the part about the abuser calling the client repeatedly at work. So when I was a counselor this summer, I was helping a female realize that the excessive calling, asking where you are, what time you're going to be home, who you're hanging out with, was actually abuse, because she thought that was just a sign that, oh, he cares about me and wants to know where I am. But I've had to remind her, he's doing that as a way to control you. So how to help her not pick up every time he calls, but realize that it's okay to put your phone down and not answer every time he calls.
Very naive question. And it's hard. I come from a home. My estrogen palace was my sainted mother, my darling bride, and my two ungrateful offspring. But they're strong women. I can't imagine anybody taking advantage of any of them. And it's probably the thing I'm the most proud of. That my oldest is helping. She gave up the ability to go into a very lucrative law career to work with special needs kids, because that was her passion. And when I see her, we coached together, and I loved it. The kids were great to me, but when she came on the pitch, the soccer pitch, they lit up. My youngest, you talk about calling,
Yes.
Dad, you coming home for dinner? Because they're worried I'm not going to eat right. She's in Boston, but we see her every other weekend. So when you grow up around very intelligent, because they're all smarter than me, very powerful, very driven women, it's hard, but I'm going to ask the question, and please don't take it wrong.
Yeah.
Why do they put up with this? Why don't they just get up and leave?
Because sometimes leaving is actually more dangerous than being in the situation itself. And that's so one of my good friends had to grapple that question every day that she was in the relationship. Why can't you just leave? And her answer was, it's not safe for me to leave right now, because for all I know, he could track me my next move. Or if it's dangerous, because I don't have an income to rely on, because he was our sole income in the house.
Yeah. And also, they love the person they're with, whether they're in a long-term relationship or, maybe just starting out, but they care about this person or they've been married to this person. It's not so easy. I think what they want is the abuse to stop, and so it's, for all the things that Emily said, is DCF going to get involved if we have kids and, I have to call the police and, so there's all sorts of things. And there's a tremendous amount of shame that people carry because survivors believe it's their fault. Their abusers make them believe that they're the problem, they're at fault, everything they do. And actually, we had one woman, survivor that I know that basically said, in terms of safety planning, she got out of her relationship. She's now with someone else. She's very happy. She's done tremendous work in living now violence-free. But she says, I always know how to change my social security number. I always have a bag packed. I know how to change my name if I need to, and I can be gone in 30 minutes if I need to and have a whole new identity. And she lives with that every day, even though she hasn't been...
God bless her for being able to do that, but oh my God.
Well, it takes a tremendous amount of energy, psychic, emotional, and physical
the baggage
energy.
You're carrying, just thinking that I may have to change my entire identity in 30 minutes. That's got to weigh on you.
Yep. Well, this particular woman was practically killed. She came to within an inch of her life now. She does not live in Milford, but she lives in our catchment area, and she was practically killed, within an inch of her life. And so she, that's what she's had to do, and that's what she has to do every day, and she thinks about it every day. There's not a day, so I'm sure there are people like her in Milford that every day you have to think about where you're going, what you're posting, what you're doing, how you're driving to a particular place. Are you always driving the same way?
And I've helped a woman who literally from the courthouse, we called a shelter, and then 30 minutes later she was halfway across the state. So you just never know also where the shelter will place you, and you can't be picky. And that's something people are just why can't you just leave also the town you're in? You're leaving everything you know.
Incredible. And I mean, from everything I read, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, the animal is condemning his children Because it seems that a lot of the abusers, I don't know if you can't say inherited it, but were
It's a learned behavior.
learned behavior.
Yeah, it's a learn. No one comes out of the womb thinking they're going to abuse other people. But if you see that day after day in your household, if that's what you, and that's how we form our first impressions of what relationships are like from our parents. So if you see that every day, day in and day out, and that's what you come to believe, it's really hard, I mean, to work to change that belief system, to understand how you developed it, and then change that belief system. It's not easy work.
How do you build somebody's self-esteem? I mean, I've been married for 100 years. I can't imagine, the biggest fear I have is that my darling bride's going to wake up someday and say, I married way too far below me. And I don't know that I could ever start again, but you can't even compare something like, if I've had my self-esteem beat to a pulp for decades, how do you take somebody and start building it up
So
again?
what I've done is ask them what their strengths were before they were in a relationship. What did they like to do? And try to slowly integrate their old life back into their new life. Because that way they feel a sense of connectedness, whether it's reconnecting with their church or going back to school if their abuser prevented them from going to school, or if it's getting back in touch with their art, their music, whatever they had before, just trying to help them, remind them this is just a piece of their life, not their whole entire life.
Yeah, and I mean, it takes time. This is not easy work. When you've, lived with an abuser for years and years, and your self-esteem is really non-existent, it starts with little things. It starts with just being able to tell someone about it is, okay, that's a huge step to be able to disclose this to someone. The small things that you use to build up someone's sense of self-efficacy. It's really hard.
It's my fault that my family is falling apart. And obviously, if the animal is abusing me, they're not going to take any responsibility themselves.
No, they never will.
So you're putting it on me. And I guess, they say if you say something enough times, some people will believe it. If 24/7 I'm being told that I'm worthless, I'm a piece of fecal matter, some of it's got to stick.
It sticks quite a bit.
Yes, and I've had clients when I was doing counseling, if they've had a repeated phrase, I reverse it. So if they were told I'm worthless, I would have them practice I'm not worthless, or like at the beginning and the end of our session. So eventually that positive language sticks with them rather than the negative language that you mentioned.
I was shocked when I saw a documentary where they asked a woman, why do you stay? And she had not worked for a long time.
Right.
And she brought out the fact that she was legitimately scared that her spouse would look really good in front of a judge.
Oh, we see that a lot.
Yes.
The Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde
Yes,
phenomena.
we see that.
And he would get custody of the kids.
We see that too.
Yes.
That happens
And
all the
she
time.
said, the way she said it was, he's going to beat on somebody. I'd rather have him hit me than my children. And at first, it kind of set me back, and I said, oh my God, who would fault a mother for protecting her children in any way she could?
Right.
So you can't hold it against this woman. She was doing what she thought.
Right. Well, you can't blame the survivor. I mean, even if they stay, you really can't blame that person. It's the person who's doing the abuse. Instead of asking why do they stay, they should be asking why does this person abuse someone? That's the better question to ask. Not why do they stay, but why is this person using violence?
But, it's like when somebody says, I can't imagine these people who walk into a school and kill kids. And I said, if you could understand them, you'd scare me. Because your brain must be cross-wired in a real bizarre way if you could understand any rational reason to hurt a child.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
I guess I can't understand, and I hope I never will, why somebody would abuse hopefully you love the person you're married to, and
Hopefully.
Yes.
at some point,
Mm-hmm.
and even if you drift away from each other as adults,
Mm-hmm.
you can't drift away from your kids.
No. And, I also wanted, you just reminded me that I just want to mention that the abuse isn't always physical. There's a lot of abuse that's emotional, psychological, financial. So we've been focusing a lot on physical abuse, but,
Yeah, but Marcia, I can
The-
see that.
right.
That,
Someone comes in with a black eye or a broken tooth, but the emotional and psychological abuse can be even more destructive because it's so invisible.
And that's the hard part in the court system is with the restraining orders, you need to have attempted physical harm, cause physical harm, and or at least cause fear. And for causing physical harm, you can see it, but how do you explain the psychological abuse to a judge without breaking down? Because some people, when you see a black eye, oh, that's obvious, here's the restraining order. But people don't realize that psychological abuse can be just as damaging, if not more, than
well,
the
the
physical
other thing
abuse.
is, the signs, I once looked at my darling bride and I said, I hope the police don't see my oldest daughter. They're gonna call family services on us, because she was a very rugged soccer player. So we're taking her into the pediatrician, and she's got bruises and bumps, and I'm like, I hope you understand, those are all from playing soccer. And they seem to know right away. They said they can tell what's a sports injury.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the layman, all I saw was a bruised daughter. And you want to make it better. You don't want her to be all bruised up.
Right.
And I know I've made that judgment call. I've seen somebody out shopping and I see a bruise, and sadly my first instinct is abuse now. And I know it shouldn't, because not everybody out there is being abused. So I have to retrain myself and realize that there are other ways to get bruises, not just physical abuse.
But now, if I've made the very difficult decision, I can't stay here for the safety of my children, because I got to believe more women are worried about their kids than themselves.
I would just say that's probably true.
You know what I mean? They'll take the abuse to protect the kids, but if the kids get in danger. So they call you and say, Marcia, get me out of here. So you get to pick from hundreds of homes and different areas with all openings.
Well, there's not a lot of openings. That's part of the problem. As I mentioned, when someone's ready to leave, you want to be able to help them leave. And it's very difficult because in any given day in Massachusetts, there's probably about 200 people or more looking for shelter beds, and there's not enough shelter beds in the state. I will say, you mentioned earlier when we were talking Karen Polito, and I'll give a plug to the Lieutenant Governor because she's been really great in advocating for more services for domestic violence victims. But there's just not enough shelter capacity for the number of people who want to leave. So we try the best we can. If there's no shelter space, we work with the Department of Transitional Assistance. We work with some of the homeless providers. We have at times sent people out of state, Rhode Island or New Hampshire, bordering states, because sometimes they have space that we can't get them into a shelter.
I'm living in a town like Milford. I got a nice little split level house. My kids are going to a nice school. I can't take it anymore.
Yep.
I can't take the abuse. I call you, and my option is a homeless shelter?
It might be.
God help us.
I know, it's terrible.
There are more homeless shelters in the state of Massachusetts than DV shelters.
There's probably more animal shelters than there are domestic violence shelters. So, and that's another thing. A lot of times people don't leave because of a pet. Because one of the things that an abuser will threaten is killing a pet. That's another thing. Anybody who calls our hotline, we usually do what's called a high-risk assessment, because we know that there are certain things that will indicate that this person is at much greater risk for homicide. So, homicide, yes. So are there guns in the home? Is there history of substance abuse? Has this person threatened to kill you?
Is there a criminal record?
Yeah, is there a criminal record? Has there been an instance of strangulation? Strangulation is one of the key indicators that this person is at high
Wait a minute.
risk for domestic violence.
There's a person, man or woman, who tried to kill their spouse or has been proven to be beaten on their spouse, and they're still in the house with the kids?
Yes?
Okay,
Multiple
I'm
times,
naive.
too.
I'm
I
naive.
know it's hard to wrap your head around it if you don't do this work. You're not naive. I think, as I said, if you're not immersed in this work, it's really hard to wrap your head
I
around
was in
it.
your place before I started working at New Hope, not gonna lie.
It's really hard. But, you know, one of the things I want to circle back to what Emily mentioned just very briefly, which is the role of bystanders. Because, as you say, and, you know, now that maybe your eyes are opened, you might see a little more, or you might want to see a little more, you know, recognizing if you suspect there's an issue, you know, to talk to someone, say, you know, I might be wrong, but I'm really worried. Are you safe at home? You know, is there something, you know, I just want you to know if you ever need anything, I'm here for you, kind of thing. You know, just
Isn't that a scary movie, though?
is
If
it?
you're a neighbor, it's the right thing to do, but I think Emily's getting beat up. If I go to her, and first of all, do I have the right to?
Sure.
I mean, I would think so, but the abuser may have a different view on life.
But maybe, you know, you do it when the abuser is not there. And Emily might say, oh, no, everything's fine. I'm fine. It's not a problem. But something in your gut, you know, sometimes when you see things, particularly if it's a neighbor and you see things going on, or, you know, you can just say, well, look, I'm here. I just want you to know. I'm just concerned. If there's anything you ever need or want to talk to, I'm here. I'm open. You know, no judgment.
And you can also, as the bystander, call our hotline and be like, I noticed my neighbor might be getting abused, but I'm afraid to confront her. That's not the right word, but like go up to her and talk to her. Can you provide me suggestions on how to go about talking to her?
I mean, the other thing, I will say, I've done this more than once. I will be driving my car down the road and I see two people walking and they look like they're about ready, you know, like they're starting to get physical. And I'll pull my car over and say, you know, roll the window down and say, hey, everything okay? Do you need me to call the cops or anything? And they immediately, you know, oh, yeah, everything's fine. But it's just to let them know, like, people are watching, people are looking, you know, so.
Now, if you ask Chief Paghetti, our police chief, do you think he'd say that's a good idea to, I mean,
I don't know. I just do it because it just
No, I
feels like the right
understand,
thing.
and
I
God
feel like
bless
I'm in
you.
my car, so if they come after me, I can hit the gas
hit the
and drive off. But
you know, like I said, I only came across this domestic abuse thing once. When I was a kid, I thought my mother was so cool because she found out one of her girlfriends was being abused by the husband once he drank. Mom picked up a 2x4, went to the house, and just looked at the guy and said, you want to hit women? Come on, here's your chance. But you ever touch her again, next time I won't ask you. Of course, my father and I had a fit, saying, do you realize the danger you put yourself in? My mother's old Portuguese mother, you know.
she wasn't going to take anything.
She goes,
Yeah.
you think I need a man to help me with that weasel? He's not a man. But in today's day and age, you'd shudder,
Yep,
you know, to think that the guy could have pulled a gun on her.
exactly.
You know, so God bless her, because this was old, I mean, this is terrible to say, but it's the old Portuguese way.
Yeah.
Somebody messes with the family, you go fix it.
But, you know, we need more people. I don't know about going with a 2x4, but we need more people like your mother who are willing to take a stand and go out and speak up.
Yes.
Because that's.
I would have been happy if she went with a cell phone.
Well, did
You
they
know,
have
and
cell
call-
phones back then?
No, but you know, today's day and age, calling the hotline,
Yeah.
saying, look, I'm not sure because I'm not trained, but the odor of rodent is in the air. I smell a rat next in this house, or, you know, something's just not right.
Yep.
Could somebody who knows what they're doing, you know, somebody who's trained, just keep an eye on them?
And never be afraid to call in a wellness check, because as somebody who's worked in the court system, I've gotten to know a lot of the local police officers, and they always remind me to tell clients, if you suspect something, like, call us and we'll come do a wellness check. It's not a bother to us. This is what we're here for, to protect the community.
See, now that I could see the Milford police doing. We had the chief on the other night, and we were talking about the question I want to ask you about social workers going in. But he mentioned that a lot of his officers train on de-escalating and, you know, taking it down steps. And we started laughing because when I grew up here, there were certain police officers. And one of them took us to play hockey. The other one, they could de-escalate by looking at you.
Yeah.
You know, Carlos or Joe, even Artie looked at you, and it's like, yeah, okay. But in today's day and age,
Yeah, it's not the same.
yeah, I mean, they were neighborhood guys first. But they were police officers, so you showed them the respect. Today, it seems in reverse, that the cops they're guilty by association before anybody really looks at what happened.
Well, there's no doubt one of the most dangerous calls they go on are domestics, I think. At least that's what I've been told by police, that those are some of the
And
most
now
dangerous.
people are saying you ought not send the police in, you ought to send in social workers.
Well, there are police stations where, you know, advocates we don't do any ride-alongs with police, but there are some places where advocates do that. We have worked with some of the police departments. We have a advocate in the Southbridge Police Department and Webster Police Department, and we follow up on all of the calls that all the domestics that they respond to, and we follow up with the survivor to see if we can, you know, get them into services and see what else they need and try to, you know, make sure that they're feeling safe.
Marcia, sending Emily with a police officer, okay. But this idea of you go in, if you run into a problem, call us. I don't understand. That would be the most scary thing for me.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's something we would have our staff
No.
do. If
I
there
think
was
if we would go with them, but I don't think we'd
Right,
go by
yeah,
ourselves.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, see, that, when I hear about take police officers offline, send in social workers, they're better trained, equipped, until something goes bad.
Yeah, I think it depends what the call is. With the domestic, and particularly if there's an idea that there could be firearms, I think that's very different than someone's out on the street and they're having a mental health breakdown. You know, that might be a little bit different. I don't know enough about that issue, but I would not, as the director of New Hope, I would not send my staff alone into a domestic violence call.
Yeah.
So,
What are the biggest challenges you face?
Probably people, so when I was in the court system, it would be the abuser wanting to talk to the client while they're in the hearing and try to start a fight even in the courthouse. And me as the advocate trying to without getting in the middle, de-escalating the situation and trying to bring the court officer in to keep them apart. Because while the client might be feeling that they're safe, they might not actually be safe in the courthouse. So that's a big challenge I've faced. And people being ignorant to the fact, no offense to you, but like the whole idea of it doesn't happen here. So that's the biggest challenge.
I mean, this has to be stupid abusers. I mean, you go to court, so you're living with your spouse.
Yes.
You've had all that time to talk and you're not talking, you're doing bad things. So now you're going to court in front of a judge and you're trying to start a fight?
Yes, because they're still trying to maintain control in whatever way possible. Whether it's trying to apologize to the abuser and be like, oh, this will never happen again, drop the order, I promise I won't hit you again. But we all know that when they say that, they don't necessarily mean that. They're just trying to coerce them as a way to keep them under their wing.
So I've been abusing you for years, and now I'm just going to say, never mind, I won't do it anymore.
Yes.
Does that work?
no,
No.
I mean,
no, it doesn't
you
work
hear
at all.
about child abusers. You know, these animals who, and I refuse to say sex abusers with children. Because to me, you can't have sex with a kid.
No,
That is, no. You know, there's some kind of sick power thing you're doing But don't tell me it's sexual.
No, it's definitely not
It's-
sex. It's about power and control.
Yes.
It's all about power and control.
But now you sit there and say, now, wait a minute. What, is there any way of getting that animal, you know, can I get an alligator to stop biting me?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can tape its mouth and I can do things and it's there, but can you ever cure these people?
Well, are you talking about any abuser or sex abusers? Sexual abusers?
Well, I guess, well, sex abusers to me is 12-gauge enema.
Yeah,
That fixes the
I-
whole problem. That's the only way, I'm sorry. I have no sympathy for anybody who hurts a child, but
I mean,
somebody
we-
who's
yeah,
abusing
yeah.
a spouse.
We have had, as I mentioned before, we do also work with people who perpetrate violence. We do what's called a psycho-educational group. It's 40 weeks. People come in on a rotating basis, and as I said, it's not anger management, because these people you would see them out in the community, you would think they were the pillars of the community. But somehow they've developed this belief system, and again, probably, I would say most of the people we see have a history from childhood where they've been witnessed or been victims themselves. And that's what they've learned. So what we try to do is help them uncover the roots of their belief system, learn new skills, teach them empathy. We did have one man that, I'll just share this story, this man in our group, and he said when his son got to be about, 16 or so, he started to see in his son the same behaviors that were in him. And when he saw that, he broke down and cried, because he realized, it hit him suddenly, that what he was doing was now, he
But
could
isn't
see it
that
repeating.
natural? I mean, I drive my daughters crazy
Mm-hmm.
when I say, God, you're behaving more and more like your mother every day.
The apple doesn't fall far
But,
from
you
the
know, I
tree.
look at,
they say.
they're both very intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
They're both driven. They're strong.
Right.
I mean, it's exactly what my darling bride is. I'm proud of that.
So, well, that's great. So that's the role model they had. So it's no surprise that they have adapted to that, and that's what they see, and that sounds all incredibly
Well, I
healthy.
guess if I was
So-
sick and I beat them, oh God, just
Yeah.
and
I
that's
mean-
what they grew up with.
Then they might
That's what
look
they
for
want.
partners who reminded them of you, which would be an abusive partner, rather than the healthy, respectful
right.
father
Yeah,
that
so
you
that's
are.
how it gets perpetrated. So this man started to see this in his son, and what I heard, these groups are facilitated by a male facilitator and a female facilitator. And what I was told by the male facilitator is the guy threw his arms around the male facilitator and just sobbed, because he realized that his son, he had taught his son to do
That he's
exactly what he
creating
was
a
doing.
monster.
And so, yeah, that was a success story, I mean, I think
What are the odds?
of success stories, it's hard to know, because we don't do longitudinal. As I said, when they're in the group, we do check with their partners to make sure they're violence-free, and we usually have pretty decent success. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but once they leave, we don't really have a way to track, are they 2 years out, are they still violence-free? But the numbers are probably more like in the 50% range. It's hard. Most of those guys are there because of the court system. So they come in not really wanting to be there. But the beauty of the 40 weeks is that because someone may come in and they've got an attitude and they've got a chip on their shoulder, but the guy who's at week 38 will look at him and say, yeah, I used to think that too, So not only are they hearing it from our staff, but they're hearing it from their peers, their other people.
It is pretty amazing. The one time I shadowed that group, because one cool thing about New Hope is when you first get hired, you get to sit in on each of the different programs to learn about the different services. So when I sat in on the RESPECT program, which is our intimate partner abuse education program, just watching the difference between somebody who had just started that day, who was angry, resentful of being there, and then compared to the person at the end of the program who had this whole new skill set and realized how thankful they were to be part of this group is just amazing.
Well, I guess it's too easy. Let's say it's a 50-50 shot.
Mm-hmm.
It's too easy to focus on the 50% that you didn't cure.
Mm-hmm.
But wow, it must be so gratifying to think that
If you
half the
yeah.
families,
If you can get if you can get one family to suddenly be violence-free, I mean,
To be
that's
normal.
huge. Yeah, that's huge.
if you can take one mother and
Mm-hmm.
children or father and children
Mm-hmm.
that were under this cloud,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden they're living a normal life,
Yep.
and that means the 2 kids or 3 kids will probably live a more normal life.
Right.
That's pretty outstanding.
Yeah. I think we're coming back in November, and I have I have a woman from Milford who works in the school system, who, as Emily's doing an internship there now, but she can talk about the impact on children because she sees it every day, and she used to be on the board at New Hope, so she understands the work. She lives in Milford, she works in the Milford school system, so she's gonna be with me in November, so we can focus more on children, because that's, the prevention is the thing that we really need. I think when you say, what's the biggest challenge? The biggest challenge is prevention dollars. When I got to New Hope 6 years ago, we had a $2 million budget, and any idea how much money we got for prevention? $20,000. Now, we serve 41 cities and towns, and we get $20,000 for prevention. How can we prevent domestic violence with that? It's a joke.
Where does your funding come from?
State is probably about 70%, the
Oh,
Department
okay.
of Public Health. We get United Way funds from 2 different United Ways. Lots of donations, events. Oh, I wanted to talk about our events. Speaking of funding, good timing. We have a little bit more time. So I just wanted to say that if people are interested in learning more, first they can go to our website, which is www.new-hope.org. And we are having a virtual breakfast called Highlights of Hope, where we're actually going to have a woman whose daughter was murdered due to domestic violence in the Southbridge area, and she's going to be our featured speaker, and she has started a foundation for her daughter in her daughter's memory. And so she can talk about the impact of domestic violence right here, not in Milford, but in southern Worcester
And for
County.
those of you who are old like me and can't memorize,
Mm-hmm.
Websites that quickly,
Uh-huh.
The fellow who runs and makes the show happen, Brent, will put on what we call the bottom thirds, the bottom of the screen. He'll put that website on there and the contact, and hopefully there's no more than the 100 that we already know of in Milford, but realistically, we know there will be.
Right.
And Brent will put down your phone number.
Yeah, and if he can put down the hotline.
That's what I'm
Yes,
saying. He'll put
yes.
down the phone number
Yes,
so
yes.
that anybody who needs it
Absolutely.
can go.
Something I forgot to mention is that, say it's not safe to speak on the phone, something new that we did during COVID was we have an online web chat service from 9 to 4, Monday through Friday. So it's similar to a hotline where if you have any questions, if you're a survivor, if you're a caregiver, you're a teacher, you can just reach out, and then whoever's on the other end can answer your question or even direct you to the hotline or other services needed.
Well, that's cool, because if I'm using my phone or sending you email, or I can wipe out my history.
And the best part is that when you
Right.
quick escape from the website, it doesn't show up in your history, brings you to a Google page.
That's
and
what I'm
you
Yeah,
never
it
saying.
know.
completely disappears.
Because from what you're saying, I may only have a few minutes
Right.
before my tormentor. And I'm
Right.
sorry to be so.
And they may have your
Caustic,
phone,
but-
and, there's so much, the technology, that's the other challenge for us, is keeping up with the technology, because as you know, technology changes so quickly in today's world, and the abusers are very savvy about that, so. But I do want to get back to, just to mention very quickly, our Highlights of Hope breakfast. It's going to be on November 10th from 8 to 9:30 virtually. We have a woman who's going to be speaking about her daughter. We're going to be giving some awards to people, including, now I'm totally blanking, a woman in Southbridge who's been a great advocate, Jasmine Riveras, who works in the school system in Southbridge. a school in Southbridge that we've been working with for a long time. We're giving an award to one of our big funders out of Foxborough, and to Representative Betty Poirier. I don't know if you know Betty Poirier.
No.
She's a rep from North Attleboro, and she's retiring after 20 years of service, so we're giving her a special award. So we'd love to have folks, if folks want to learn more about New Hope and come to the breakfast virtually, the information's on our website.
So it's like a Zoom meeting?
Yes, yes, yes. So
And we can give money?
you can give money, yes. We always need money. But, you know, again, as I said, I did say all of our services were free. I did not completely honest, because we do make the abusers pay a small fee to hold them accountable. So they do pay based on a sliding scale to be in our group for the folks who abuse. So they do pay a small amount.
Not enough. I don't
No.
know what it is, but
No, well, it depends on their income. And again, we have people who are indigent from people who are extremely wealthy. You know, as to circle back to your opening comment about not understanding how this can happen in Milford. It happens in the wealthy communities, the poor communities, you know, it happens in gay communities, it happens in immigrant communities, faith communities. I'm of the Jewish faith. People want to think it doesn't happen in the Jewish faith. It absolutely happens in the Jewish faith. So, you know, I think every group likes to think, well, it's all of those people, it's not us, but it's really all of us.
sickness has no home.
Yes.
I would have never believed in our little town of Milford, the Portuguese community that we all know. Portuguese, I can't say Portuguese.
I'm familiar with the term.
I mean, I grew up with everybody calling me Portuguese, so
Do you speak Portuguese?
it's my first language.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, and I never knew till my darling bride came to my home. And she looked at me and said, "Do you ever speak to your parents in English?" And I said, "Of course." No.
Is she Portuguese?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. But it was funny. She quickly learned enough to know what was going on. But the only English we spoke in the house was when people were over who didn't speak
Yeah,
Portuguese.
exactly.
You know, but you just sit there and say, you don't want to believe it.
No, you don't.
You just don't want to believe that the people that you associate with, you know, it's kind of makes me feel like the opioid crisis, where you don't want to believe that
No.
little Sally or little Mikey, who you've known since a kid, all of a sudden has a dark
Right.
side.
Well, you know, even the survivors, you know, as Emily was saying, the woman whose partner was continually calling her, even the survivors, you know, are in denial oftentimes when they first come, you know, like, oh, I'm here, you know, maybe someone referred them, or,
TCF's making me do
Yeah.
this to get my kids back.
yeah, and they don't want to believe that it's them. They don't want to believe that they've been victimized, and it takes a long time. You know, when you think about stages of change, the first thing is we're all, you know, it's like anything. It's like, you know, you want to quit smoking. Oh yeah, I could quit smoking. You know, people are in denial, and then they move through a process of behavior change, and
But it's
so
almost natural. I can't control you. I can control me. Is there something I could have done to keep this from happening? Is there something I could do to keep my family
well, I
together?
think that's what people keep trying to do, and I think because it's about power and control.
But you know, when do I know? I mean, that's a scary, scary movie. I don't want to pull it up short and then find out I could have saved my family. But in the interim, how much pain do I have to suffer?
Yeah.
You know, and again, I can't even fathom the decision that, and again, it sounds sexist, and I apologize, but that these women go through.
It takes
To
a lot of courage
Yes.
to suddenly say you're going to leave your home, you're going to leave your family, you're going to leave your friends, you're going to leave maybe your job, your support system, and you're going to disappear, and you're not going to be in touch with any of these people.
But you mentioned it. The crime, besides the obvious, is that now I have to leave Milford. You know, when my father passed away, my mother moved in with us. and we were living in DC, and you could see it wasn't the same. All of her girlfriend, she was 80 years old.
Right.
You
Her
know,
whole
but
network.
her whole network, since she came to Milford, you know, in 1941, was here.
Right.
And, you know, luckily I'm married to a saint, because my darling bride saved my mother's life by moving her in with us. And then saved her again by saying, this isn't the same for her.
Yeah.
We should go back to Milford. And Sharon had never been in Milford. But you could see when my mother came back, all the lifelines
Yeah.
turned back on.
Well, that goes back to that sense of social connectedness. Yep.
And all of a sudden, you're taking somebody and you're ripping them out of Milford, or whatever town they're in, sending them, out west, sending them to Springfield or somewhere. But I can't imagine starting
It's
from
very
square
hard.
one.
And then worrying that even if you're in a new safe place, how safe can that be and for how long? So constantly feeling like you're on edge and might have to move again is a fear that not many people think about.
We had a girl that played soccer for us, and we always had to honor the mother's wish that she never be on a movie that made it to the TV.
Yeah.
I never asked why,
Well,
but now
that's
it's starting to
probably-
sound
that's
like,
Probably a red flag.
you know, that the child could be on TV and the predator, you know,
Would see it.
will see it and now
Yep.
know where she is.
Yep. Those are the things you have to think about.
We're running out of time, but the next time we come back, I've got to ask Saint Emily how you stay sane. Because you have to be a saint. I mean, to go through this every day. And you know, you're saving the 50%. What a wonderful, wonderful thing you're doing.
Thank you. So what I tend to do, and quick, is I embrace my commute home. I'll listen to music. I'll have the window down. I'll try as hard as it is to leave work at work and use that time coming home to just think about what I'm looking forward to when I get home. Because for me, home is a safe place. So remembering that and trying to realize that I'm not like the people I help, which is awful, but to embrace what makes me me. So,
Well, I look forward to our next session. And again, all I can say is thank you.
Well, thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us. It's been a
No,
pleasure.
it's- What you're doing for the 100 people I never knew. But they're Milford, they're our family. They all bleed Milford red. The fact that somebody would harm them is annoying. The fact that you're helping to save them is amazing.
Well, thanks for having us
yes,
on.
thank you.
As always, we learned so much about what's available in Milford. This is one service that I hope none of our viewers, our friends, our family ever have to use. But it's wonderful to know that if need be, there are people like St. Emily who are there to help out. And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, I really do hope none of you ever come in contact with this, but may tomorrow be a better night than tonight. God bless, and thank you for joining us.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just searching for my soul.